Lavoratori!
Ragazzi, mi si smonta tutto. Il film non si fa più. 2 giorni qua non ci deve essere più niente. Bisogna cominciare subito. Coraggio, al lavoro. Buttate giù. Dico bene, autore?
Sì, grazie. Arrivederci, ragazzi. Ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.
Ciao, marinai.
Welcome to Cinema Italia, a podcast dedicated to the world of Italian cinema. Presented by me, John Bleasdale.
Relationship to Italian cinema, I don't consider myself any kind of expert on Italian cinema. I feel very all at sea. But of course, the silent era is very different. And one of the reasons that the silent era is different for me is that, I'm aware that they dominated this period. The first real feature film, Cabiria in 1914, the Diva films, which we're going to talk about. But also, much more personally, I go to 2 major film festivals every year where I see a lot of silent film. And one of them is Il Cinema Ritrovato in Bologna, and the other one is the most prestigious silent film festival in the world, which is in Pordenone, northern Italy. And so, yes, there is a certain bias towards Italian silent cinema there, but also my understanding of silent cinema is entirely infused with, the sort of scent of gelato. And so I can't really distinguish the 2 things in my mind. I apologise for anyone who, if I say something that is ignorant about later Italian silent cinema. I studied neorealism at college, but this is really, I'm very much an early girl in this situation.
Yeah, but that's your area of expertise, and that's exactly what I want, because I'm kind of the other way around. In fact, I've got a feeling that the film that you suggested we watch, Assunta Spina, is maybe the first Italian silent film I've seen.
Wow.
I know. No, I mean, that might not be true, but I'm pretty... Yeah, it's not... There are not many that I've seen, put it that way.
I mean, I'm interested, as someone who obviously does know Italian cinema, had you heard of it? Did you know of it? Did you think, this is probably what I'll pick? Or
No, not at all. To be very frank, the reason for doing this podcast is primarily because I don't know a lot about Italian cinema, and it's embarrassing to live in a country and not be as au fait with the cinema as I should be. I think I probably know French cinema a bit better than Italian cinema. So this is partly I'm going to get a private film course on the cheap by just getting everybody to explain it to me. And so tell me about Italian silent cinema. I mean, even the fact that the first thing you said there, which is how important the Italian film industry was to the development of silent cinema, even that sort of comes as a little bit of news for me.
So, I mean, if we're talking about the sort of 1910s, this is a period where Italian cinema, French cinema and Danish cinema perhaps are sort of dominating the world market. Now, obviously, what happens during the war is that everyone in Europe gets a bit distracted and America steals a march on everyone else. But up till this period, if you were any kind of cinephile, you would have to know Italian cinema. And for example, I mean, people often get this fact wrong, but the very first film to be screened at the White House was not that racist American film. It was Cabiria from 1914. And the Italian film industry at this point was in one of its many very ambitious periods, as far as I'm aware. We're talking about making monumental films with that sort of based on mythology, based on great classics of literature. The actress that we're going to talk about today, she was Cordelia in a fantastic version of King Lear from 1910. Really, really one of the sort of my favourite Italian silent films. So, this is an industry that has great ambitions, great cinematic innovations, and also a lot of ties to literature and drama and theatre.
The thing I love about what you just said is everyone gets a bit distracted. That's got to be one of the best descriptions of the Great War that I've ever heard.
I mean, it's interesting. I mean, but I'm being flippant in many ways, but I mean, it really is just a matter of like it was of sort of national importance to these industries. That you could see French or Danish or Italian films all around the world, and it felt important. And obviously, somehow it didn't feel very important when there was a lack of resources and staff and personnel and great human tragedy unfolding. So and this is when, because I think it's very easy to imagine that America always dominated, and it wasn't true. It wasn't true. And we're going to delve into the European origins of great cinema, and that's quite exciting.
You mentioned Cabiria, and that, to tell you the truth, that's one film that I've heard a lot about, and I know that Gabriel D'Annunzio, the sort of famous novelist and sort of proto-fascist, wrote the intertitles for. That was the one that I was thinking, I bet she picks that one.
I suppose I thought maybe someone else would pick it, or it's just such a big film. I was finding it quite exhausting to talk about. I chose Assunta Spina because I thought it linked into lots of other interesting things. It wasn't such a kind of dominating film in that way, but I think it's really key. And to me, it's got a lot to do with a lot of the following Italian silent films that I do watch. I think it actually looks forward more to how Italian cinema develops over the silent era in my sort of limited understanding of that, rather than being this one-off monumental epic. And I've never been much of a fan of. See, now ideally I'm going to organise this conversation so you pronounce all the Italian, but I'm not a huge fan of the Maciste films, and I just again I'm probably pronouncing everything so horribly. But so I'm more of a diva than a Maciste. That's, as you can tell, obviously from everything about me. So I thought we'd get into the divas.
Yes. Well, let's do that, because again, that is a subgenre of Italian silent cinema, and I'm assuming Assunta Spina is like an exemplar of these films. Is that right?
It is indeed. So when you think of sort of the diva drama, you sort of have to think of like the model of Asta Nielsen in Denmark making Afgrunden and going into Weimar Germany and doing more of that sort of thing. It's the erotic melodrama with this intense brooding star, a very powerful star at the heart of the film, female star, and a sense of a particular kind of acting that's somewhere between theatre and naturalism. There's so many links. Francesca Bertini, who stars in Assunta Spina, actually remade more or less one of Asta Nielsen's films. But that is the idea. You have these women who are stars, actors, probably producers, probably co-directors and writers as well, and that the entire film is almost a frame for their talents.
And she's not only, well, exactly what you say there. She's also sort of credited with being a director on this film, a co-director, I should say.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting. So, it's sort of, it's a great vehicle for her to play the lead in Assunta Spina, and she's down as producing the film and coming up with many of the creative decisions. She later claimed to be the co-director, and actually the co-star, one of her co-stars, and the guy who's meant to be the director both said no, she basically directed it all. It's complicated because we have such a, quite set idea of what a director does and what they do on set. And it might look quite different if you are working with a fixed camera, if you're working with a stage that's deeply staged, the blocking's worked out in advance, if you're also obviously working in front of the camera when the scenes are rolling. So, for example, it might not look like what we think of directing looks like, but who's making the decisions about the mise en scène? Who's making the decisions about the locations and the settings? And she's talked very passionately. If you ever find footage of Francesca Bertini talking later in life, it's incredibly good value about how she chose the settings for this film and how she thinks that she basically invented neorealism in 1915. And it's not as tenuous an argument as it might be, it seems.
No, I was totally, as I was watching it, I was, almost inevitably thinking about, this seems to be, maybe if we started talking about the story a little bit, that sort of gives a sense, because the story is also reminded me of the sort of noirish beginnings of neorealism with Ossessione, this sort of a fatal love triangle. Could you give us a sort of synopsis for those who haven't haven't seen the film yet.
So Assunta Spina is a young woman who lives near Naples, and she's in love with a man who's a butcher, a violent man. I think they're engaged. She has an ex-boyfriend who's on the scene. He's trying to make trouble. So she moves to Naples to work in, I think, work in the laundry, be close to her man, and yet this guy just won't leave them alone, and this provokes her boyfriend's violent rage, and he attacks her with a knife. Now, what happens next is not particularly palatable. Not that that's pleasant in the slightest. The story is basically about how many sacrifices Assunta Spina will make for the love of her life, the butcher. How much of her face, her body, her life, her soul she'll give up for the man that she loves, and it's a very, very tragic story.
Yeah, we don't not necessarily spoil it, but it doesn't end well. Let's say
your jaw will drop. And if you're anything like me and you're not actually from 1915, there may be points where you get very, very angry at the film indeed.
The thing watching this film as well, by the way, yes, the angry, the toxic male of her boyfriend, the butcher. I think his name in some versions is Mangiafuoco, which means fire eater, and in another, I think the version I watched, it was called something like Boccafuoco, which is like it's similar sort of mouth of fire breather, I guess it would be. So yeah, it's not exactly subtle in terms of how it's putting those character types out there. They are very much, the female sacrifice, the male anger and vengeance, and all this sort of stuff.
It's what you do with it that counts.
Yes, exactly. But this exactly that, because though it sets up these characters as very archetypal, if you like, where they have these sort of placeholder names which tells you what they do as much as who they are. It also does have a sort of realism to it, that the melodrama is played out in quite a realistic fashion. Is this new for the time? So
it's really sort of this kind of tradition of pictorialism, really, and that does sort of two things. It's one about the way that the image looks, the set, so you can see you have the deep staging all the way back out to the street, out the back of the laundry, obviously not a laundrette, is it? It's not EastEnders. Come on, get with the program, Hutch. But and also beautiful images of the Bay of Naples, and even I think it's like a canal, the light twinkling. So beautiful pictorialism in the set design, and that contributes to the style of acting you get, which is sort of naturalistic up to a point. It's about creating these beautiful tableaus. So Francesca Bertini as Assunta will strike the most elegant pose of anguish. And she has this, it's very important in the film, she wears this shawl. And so you always pick her out. She has the longest shawl, and she does things with this shawl that are very eye-catching and help to form these elegant lines. So she wraps it tightly around herself, or she sort of holds it out so she's taking up more space in the frame. There is a naturalism to what she's doing because she's aiming this kind of performance at the camera rather than completely mimicking what her colleagues would have done on stage. But it's also, to us, it feels quite artificial. The thing that feels realistic, I think, in the film is the use of locations, and something that the neorealists would take and make into realism again, which is the fixed camera and the long take, which you have in every scene. You have a long take from a fixed camera, and it could be Anna Magnani in the ruins, but it happens to be Francesca Bertini in the laundry. But yeah, so that's one of the reasons why I sort of think the neorealism thing is a bit cheeky in many ways, because some of the comparisons are sort of incidental, and it isn't necessarily pushing against a different kind of filmmaking in the way that neorealism was, according to my understanding. Yeah,
I mean, Anna Magnani would go on to remake this film later on as well in the 50s, I think. And also that idea of the diva, she is definitely one of those figures that will owe a lot to Francesca Bertini in that sense.
It's hard to think of too many others, really, like Anna Magnani, who have that kind of power where you think literally an Anna Magnani film is this sort of frame for her talent and for her ability to convey and express passion. So this is all coming from the Esther Nielsen model, and it's always so fascinating and completely, most of the time, unfashionable these days.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about the location, so this film is set in Naples, which is sort of it's not Rome, it's not the center of Italy, it's not the industrial north. It's at the time still a very developing part of Italy. I mean, let's not use too many euphemisms. It's an extremely poor part of Italy. It's extremely backwards in the sense of it's not industrialized, and even right up until post Second World War, you will have a great deal of problems. So, and yet it's a very strikingly beautiful place, and the film sort of contains both those realities.
It really does. I mean, who was I reading? I think it might be Leah Jacobs, sort of suggesting that it's beautiful, but of course, if you're going to take a photograph of the Bay of Naples, it's pretty hard to make it anything other. But the lighting is beautiful, even in the interior scenes. And there are these scenes of the back streets where the sort of violence happens is just sort of, I mean, it might be a famous street, I don't know, but it's an ordinary street. And that sort of wide open staging of that looks very near-realist. It's also in the way they behave. There's lots going on. The situations in this film are never that formal, even in the court, in the anteroom to the court particularly. There's a lot going on behind. When you see the courtroom shot, the judges and so forth are at the back of the shot, and the women who are reacting very emotionally to what's being said are at the foreground. And there's a wonderful scene really early on, and you sort of feel like every Italian-American film ever since thought, I must have this in my Italian film, where the Assunta and her fiance and her father all have dinner together and have a meal, and they sit down to a carafe of wine and some meat, and I think he's feeding her using his knife, and they really, like, the food is clearly very important to them, and they really get stuck into it. Not only that, I think they get up from the table and they sort of carry on eating, carry on, and we're definitely showing that these are not formal upper class people. These are quite relaxed working class people, and there's a lot going on in this idea of what makes a true Neapolitan, because this film is often called Neapolitan Blood, and the opening scene, you see the skyline and then you see it dissolve into Assunta Spina being there, and there's a suggestion that she embodies some kind of value of the city. Tough luck for Naples if that's the case, obviously.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back to Magnani and Mama Roma, these women who embody entire cities, entire regions of Italy. And yet with the food, I mean, food runs all the way through this. There's a meal which takes place in the middle of the film, and where we have the dance and the crime which Mangiafoco commits, the butcher commits. And you also have a meal towards the end of the film, which is wonderfully staged, because she's prepared the food for another man. Spoiler. And the man who comes in, her boyfriend who's been released from prison, thinks it's been prepared for him, and it's just, he takes the plate off. She's put a plate on top of the other plate to keep the meat warm, and he takes it off and okay, you've prepared me dinner. That how did you know I was coming? And it's just so many. Obviously, this being a silent film, all of this is conveyed purely through us knowing as an audience that's what he's assuming, that's what he's thinking.
I mean, it's really interesting if you think about the meals, if you just excise the meals from the whole film, because you have this meal with the father, which is very casual and friendly and almost homely. Then you have it's a picnic, technically. It's called a picnic, isn't it? Where they go in boats and they go and have this lovely meal for the birthday, and there's dancing, and it's so formal. And what does it remind you of? It reminds you of a wedding. Absolutely. This is a meal and a party and the dancing and with the lovers together. Obviously, it does not end like a wedding should. And then you have this very marital scene of, she's prepared dinner for her man who's come home. He's taken a while coming home, and she, as you say, she's prepared this meal for something else. So it's really like twisting what looks like, the kind of asking for the hand of marriage, the wedding feast, and then the marital life. And it's really disturbing. Of course, it also shows in the last scene how much her life is just work now. Ever since she enters the laundry, she's just sort of doing excess of domestic labor.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that I was thinking while watching this is how Italian life seems to rhyme very easily with silent movies, because, of course, I don't want to be too stereotypical here, but my Italian friends and having lived here for quite some time, I do tend to gesture quite a lot, and there is a lot of non-verbal communication just automatically. We talk Italian with our mouths and with our hands. And this is perfect for silent cinema.
Absolutely. I think that's why the Diva tradition maybe, or one of the reasons why it flourishes there. As I say, it's also this sort of, this idea of striking poses and this sort of half theatrical, half cinematic kind of acting. But that idea that spoken Italian, and I hope I'm not saying anything out of turn here, I spend 2 weeks in Italy every year, spoken Italian sounds very emphatic. And with those gestures that you're talking about, it becomes more emphatic. And so there is something about these actors being suited to this kind of high key story. I mean, because nothing about Assunta Spina, much as we talk about the realism of the way it's shot, I mean, the situation that they find themselves is extreme. It's like almost the most extremes of emotion you could possibly imagine. If you're bleeding from the face while you're declaring your love for the man who's cut you, And so I think, and this was a popular play. So, when you see the model of the Diva film, there's a reason why it flourished in Italy, and there's probably lots of reasons, and part of them may have been the way that they treated their actresses, I don't know, and had that kind of creative freedom which went across silent cinema of this period internationally, but obviously these divas had a particular amount of creative control.
What does that power sort of translate into as Francesca Bertini's career continues? Is she making a lot of these films? Is she a central figure throughout this period?
Yeah, she carries on. She makes a few films, and she makes a lot of films with her trusted cameraman, who is Sergio Leone's father, I think. What she becomes is a sort of symbol of early silent cinema, and I don't think her career lasts that terribly long. I don't think she makes that many films, but she comes back. Bertolucci casts her in Novecento and things like that. And then there was a lot of interest in her just before she died. There was a documentary made where you see her interviewed, and you see her suddenly claiming credit, because one of the things that lasts obviously is behind the scenes creative control, and one of the things that doesn't last is being star in front of it so much. And if you persuade someone not to get the credit on the back end of the film, the career doesn't go quite as the way that you'd want it to. We're not sitting around sort of discussing, the great directors of the silent era. What about Bertini? Her name's not even on the film. Even if it does say, an extraordinary performance or whatever on the intertitles. So, I mean, it's interesting how you can sort of elevate these women and also sort of make sure that they're put back into a certain section. It's just, it's partly, we have all these biases towards directors and against producers and towards writers and against actors, and it's all nonsense.
It deserves to be constantly reassessed as we go backwards and forwards through cinema history. So you have this film in 1915, and what was its reception at the time? Was it a big hit? I'm
pretty sure it was, because the point of this is that it just solidifies the stardom of each diva. I think this was an incredibly popular film. I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that. I mean, please, go and delete this if you check this, but I'm pretty sure it was a huge hit. It's one of those sort of staple films, and it's been reshown and restored, and it's sort of in the canon. One of the things I thought it'd be interesting to talk to you about it is just that way of saying it. So this is a famous film, but it also helps us to look at film history in a slightly different way. It helps us to look at who are the creative people, and could it be that cinema about working class women was actually the most popular cinema for a medium whose audience was working class women. When we go back with our director bias sometimes, or our sort of grand movements bias, or sort of this was an innovative turning point in cinema history bias, all of which are really interesting ways to look at cinema, absolutely. You sometimes forget, that women who worked in laundries, or women who just spent a lot of time washing clothes, went to see films quite a lot this time, and, going to Assunta Spina. This is film, despite the fact that its sexual politics may not resonate with us today. This is absolute sort of audience catnip in 1915. And even if you look at films that are coming out on the other side of the channel, you've got these sort of melodramas with strong leads, and, Aston Nielsen's definitely still pumping them out. So, it's a mode. It's a mode. It's not just about this film being successful. It's about looking at what people really liked in silent cinema at the time. And it wasn't perhaps all the things that we think they like.
And I love the fact that this is kind of a suspense film as well. It has these elements, and a lot of that suspense is articulated via or conditioned via those sort of technical limitations that you talked about at the beginning, like the fixed camera, the long takes. You have to sort of build the suspense in camera, so to speak, rather than through editing or montage or parallel things like parallel narratives like Griffiths would do at a certain point.
But, bear in mind that you can do that. You can do that. You can move the camera and you can do parallel editing, and people would know about that. And you can 100% do that. This is choosing this pictorial style over that. It's a style that seems associated with a certain kind of adult, sophisticated melodrama, with a certain kind of theatrical narrative. It's a style that's associated with showcasing a great performance. So, I mean, they could move those cameras. I mean, it wasn't as easy as it would be now, and they could absolutely cross-edit. I think one of the interesting things about this film is if you described it, it's fixed camera, it's long takes, there's slightly gestural acting. It's everything that puts people off watching silent cinema. And yet these films can actually sort of get you hooked on silent cinema in their own way, because if you do watch them on the big screen particularly, oh my God, please, it's incredibly mesmerizing. And that's the entire point of Francesca Bertini and her ilk. But yeah.
I was thinking about the big screen because obviously, not necessarily obviously, but unfortunately I wasn't watching it on the big screen. But I was thinking about how that depth would appear on the big screen, that, when the people are outside the laundrette, the laundry room, or the long street, which is in the background, and people seem to be turning a corner as they come to past the windows. That would be so much more impactful on the big screen.
So I saw it on the big screen, I think about 5 years ago, 4.5 would have been at Pordenone. And yes, it is remarkable. And also trying to get yourself into that mindset of 1915. And there's two things. And one is that, we're beginning to get these longer length films. So it's about it's about 5 reel films, something, it's an hour and a quarter or something like that. And so, sitting down, this is going to be a story that's going to engross me. This is a story that's going to give me character development and, as we know, plot twists. So there's a sense, it's like sitting down to watch a 3-hour film now, thinking, well, it's going to be massive. If you've heard that the budget was 400 million or whatever, this is that kind of film in people's mindset. But also all those backgrounds, the staging might seem theatrical, but to see the light on the Bay of Naples, that's what's sort of magical. You're seeing something that you can't see at the theatre. You can only see this in this particular kind of film. And so it's got a very specific appeal in 1915. And as I say, it might seem in conception quite old-fashioned, but I think actually these things can kind of really resonate even now. I don't know if you're choosing whether these films get in or out of your Italian canon, but I hope it gets in.
Oh, no, well, I'm not particularly interested in developing my own canon. Certainly my letterboxed watch list will be, I'll produce one of those to go with the podcast, and that's definitely going to be the first film there. So, it's got pride of place.
I mean, I wish that I would say that everybody's going to watch this on some beautiful Blu-ray or go to screenings, but I'm aware when I chose it, I was like, it is on YouTube. It's not a great version, obviously it could look a lot more beautiful, but the version that you can find on YouTube does give you a sense of the staging and, of course, of the original tints and tones that you can have. So the film is coloured beautifully. So I thought, if somebody doesn't know anything about Italian silent cinema, hopefully this will sort of impress them, maybe is what I'm thinking, or just, surprise them a little. And maybe people will write in angrily after they've read this podcast, listen to this podcast and say, how could you possibly condone this film with its retrogressive attitudes towards domestic violence? But I'll just have to change my name.
But we can talk about that as well in terms of the domestic violence. As you say, this is a act of jealousy by the main character, and sort of unjustified, but even saying that sounds wrong because there's no justification for this sort of violence at all. He attacks her, cuts her face, although the level of how explicit this is obviously it's not particularly explicit, but the action is shocking, and she defends her man. And now I would offer, as a, obviously putting it into a modern day context, putting it into any context in terms of human rights, this is not behavior that you want to endorse or in any way even apologize for. That said, the Naples of the day, and even to some extent the Naples of today, the idea of the state intervening in your private life would be considered an intrusion. And so the idea that you would let the law do something to your guy, even if your guy had done something terrible to you, would be something that you know, there's a different relationship between the state and the people, because Naples for many, many years was ruled by foreign soldiers. And so I would offer that slightly as a piece of historical context, but you have to say that that Italy is a very, I would argue it's a sort of matriarchal society, not in the sense that it's in any way some sort of feminist paradise, but it's women running a patriarchy. And so in this film kind of perfectly reflects that in a sense, because the woman has the power in the sense that she could send him to jail forever if she wants to. But she uses that power actually to reinforce the male and to underwrite everything he does, even though he's done it to her.
Yeah.
How does that sound? I'm sorry. I've just realised that I've mansplained for 5 minutes, and that's not.
Well, you know, I've been to Naples once and
Right.
I bought some truffle. We went into a shop, we bought some truffle, and then we drove out again. So I don't know much about Naples. So you didn't mansplain at all, because I don't know. I think it's interesting what you say, actually, the idea that state intervention is bad, because in a way, in the film, the idea that he will be jealous and the idea that jealousy might find some violent expression, it's almost like that's the fact. That's just a fact that will happen if you're like that. That's what a man might do. A man, not all men. I'm not suggesting this film says that, but what a man might do. The terrible thing that happens to her really is that he goes to prison because she loves him and she doesn't want him to go to prison. And of course, when he goes to prison, sorry, listeners, something even worse happens to her, you know. And again, you know, the mother has that same thing where she sort of blames the Assunta for the fact that her son's gone to prison. And, you know, it is this idea that, you know, that is the thing, that's the really bad thing that's happened. You know, perhaps she shouldn't have, you know, smiled at the guy. Perhaps this shouldn't have happened. Maybe he should have behaved in a better way. But, you know, the tragedy is that he's gone to prison. So you saying that there's a sort of aversion to state intervention sort of makes sense of the plot and of the plot of a film from a play from 1909, I think, about Naples. I mean, gosh, it's more than 100 years ago. It's interesting to me that they use this framework. They're trying to find a framework to show her character just making sacrifice after sacrifice, proving the strength of her love. And so the idea, I think, in a way that might be difficult to appreciate in 2023 is that, you know, this is in a way a romantic film, because it's about a film who loves her man no matter what. Now, we could all quibble with that, but, you know, you have to sort of understand where the film's coming from. You might choose not to watch it, but, you know, this is what they're trying to say. And I think your idea about state intervention seems to completely make sense. Apologies to anyone saying stupid things about Naples too. I'm sure it's very nice. I say, lovely truffle I bought. My friend bought.
The best pizza I've ever eaten, I ate in Naples, kind of unsurprisingly, but I didn't eat pizza for like a month after I ate that pizza, because any other pizza just would have been an insult. I wanted to retain the memory, you know.
It was staying as a village nearby. It was on top of a mountain, and so we thought, oh, we'll go back down into Naples later. But then we got snowed in on top of a mountain in it was December, but yeah, so quite an unusual experience of that region, that we had terrible snow and we couldn't go anywhere, so we were stranded. So I'm ready to explore Naples. I assume that it looks beautiful in the sunlight because it did in 1915. So I'm hoping it still does.
Absolutely. Oh no, absolutely does. And it is a beautiful city. It's very much the Wild West of Italy. It's very much still got that reputation. It's still got the feeling of, you know, Liverpool in the 80s. It's a dock city.
Oh, blimey.
So
Great then. Perfect.
Yeah. It's kind of
right at home.
Yeah, very, 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 very strong culture, very strong cultural and regional identity. People who, I mean, obviously one of the most famous exports from Naples in recent years has been the Gomorrah TV series and film, and the book by Roberto Saviano. It obviously, as well, very much influenced by the Camorra, the Neapolitan mafia. And those landmarks that we talked about, the bay and everything. I wanted to ask you about that, because in a sense, that sort of shot, there's a shot of them getting into a boat, and it's quite a little bit longer shot than you would maybe expect in a film today. And it sort of struck me as, is this because for this period, like, people getting into a boat in a real place is like the special effect that cinema is giving you, which theatre won't be giving you, as you sort of said earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, we think of, like, in the early period, if you want to see some beautiful actualities of Venice and Naples and so on, there are those films, the Lumiere films, or their sort of operators around the world and their rivals. But yeah, I mean, that would be a thing to see. And, there's no, I mean, gosh, can you imagine even now if someone said, here's my film, it's set in Venice or Naples, and you don't get to see the beautiful water? You would hate it, but definitely then that would be a major attraction. The scene where the two lovers are looking out across the bay, and that's when we introduce the third man. There's sort of like, he's sort of catching up with them. So this sort of ridiculous shot in the way he sort of walks across the foreground. And I just was looking at it and thinking, this is because they have this beautiful shot and they want to have this beautiful image, and they don't want to change it to get this guy in any more sort of subtle way. So we just have him walk across the front of the scene, and so we can carry on seeing this absolutely gorgeous shot of the lovers looking out to the water. And yeah, when they're on the boat, that moment where they're just so in love is really wonderful. I just wanted to pick up on what you said about Liverpool in the 80s, because finally found something I know about. When we were talking about sort of the strong female characters and that, it did remind me of, I did some work on some British working class films of the 80s and the sort of Scouse heroines. And I'm just like, gosh, wouldn't you love to have seen, Margie Clark or Julie Walters taking this on? Very much, it's like Letter to Brezhnev bits day. So exciting. So exciting to have found a new parallel. I did not know that about Naples being like Liverpool, but I'll take it. I mean, the football was good, right?
Oh, the football's amazing. The Naples are winning the Italian championship, and they'd had Maradona found his home in Naples, and the Asif Kapadia documentary about the life of Maradona very, very specifically concentrates on that. And what's interesting about that documentary is the amount of racism, the amount of internal racism. Italy is one of the few countries where you can be racist without leaving the country, because the Northerners are very racist against the Southerners, and the Neapolitans have this, are denigrated by many people in the North, many people to this day. So there is that all of that sort of stuff mixes in throughout, and in a sense, this film encapsulates some of those prejudices in this. The violent butcher is a stock character, and the idea of stabbing people for love is a sort of cavaliere rusticana. The idea of sort of codes of honor, and it's very recognizable in a way that maybe somewhere like Milan it would be considered too over the top or too overly emotional.
Yeah, and all those codes of honor, I'm just talking generally about codes of honor generally, always seem to march neatly alongside the sexual double standard, which is very much at the heart of at least one aspect of the plot here. That's quite interesting to me. I mean, this is the problem with only going to two places in Italy ever and never going anywhere else, that I need to experience the South a bit more. But yeah, this is definitely considered to be a Neapolitan film. And I think that the appeal of that was for, audiences all around the world, the idea that you would see this true woman of Naples acting as passionately as women of Naples do. And that sounds quite naff, I understand, but that's definitely how films about Liverpudlian women have always been marketed as well. So maybe I've got more in common with this film than I thought. Gosh.
There you go.
I need to get a shawl.
and learn the vocabulary of the shawl, because
Yeah.
each of those gestures seems to have a very specific meaning.
Yeah, and I don't want anyone listening to this to think that the shawl isn't super important. The way she wears it, it marks her out as the star of this film, this passionate and very sort of tragic figure from the get-go. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful shawl work. And if you don't believe that you could be impressed by a shawl, then you have to try and watch this film. I mean, set in a laundry, they know their textiles.
I mean, that's the other thing that I found interesting about the film is obviously, you have this center female star, this central character who's really, really all our attention is focused on. And there's this idea of her beauty because she's being sought after by these different guys. But she's also not glamorous, She's her hair is a bit of a mess. I mean, I don't want to.
I'm conscious that mine is. Yeah. No,
this is an audio podcast, so nobody needs to see my my unkempt look.
I just for the record, I have one hair out of place, and
Exactly.
I haven't touched up my makeup for at least 10 minutes. So that's what that is. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because she has this beautiful dark eyes and this sort of cloud of hair tied sort of at the back, so it sort of frames her face beautifully. And if you look at sort of beauty portraits or glamour postcard images of this actress, you'll see more detail of her face and how gorgeous she looked, and that sort of dark eyes and hair is really part of that. Even when she is working in the laundry, even when she's not exactly, at a party, she looks quite glamorous, and that's sort of not glamorous, but she looks beautiful. And there's a sort of rustic poetry in the way she looks towards the end of the film, where she's really looking less glamorous. Definitely, she still looks quite beautiful. And of course, the idea that this woman has officially lost her looks. We don't see it because we can't see something as gruesome as her scar, but also we don't see it because we see the true Assunta Spina. We see that she's a woman with love in her heart, and it's all these men around her who either objectify her or see her as some kind of fallen woman who mistakenly think that she has lost her purity. And we know that she's still a woman in love, and that's that's really important to the film. As I say, it might sound very old-fashioned, but I think it's very important to how you're meant to see the character.
Oh, absolutely. And you can't look at a film of 1915 and expect it to conform to 2023 standards of behavior and or beauty. Yeah,
I mean, and in many ways, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to pick this film, because I think it absolutely holds up, and I'd highly recommend anyone to watch it. A particularly young person, but but it isn't that film that I'm just saying pick this because it fits into this and it's so modern and it tells you everything about how they were doing crazy things with cameras and look at this great director and all the sort of normal ways in. I think you have to appreciate that if you watch a lot of Italian silent cinema, you have a lot of pictorial photography, lots of natural landscapes, lots of deeply passionate narratives that might seem, not in this case, but might sometimes seem overwrought. And but that can be very, very appealing. And I want to go back to Pordenone already, but it's not till October.
Ah, damn it. Well, I'm definitely going to try and make an effort this year to come at least for the weekend and see some films, and maybe we can taste some. Pordenone? What sort of food do we have in Pordenone?
Well, in October in Pordenone, there's a lot of sort of like pumpkin gnocchi and things like that, I think.
Yeah, it is the season of the pumpkin.
I'm a non-meat eater, but I know that they definitely have that. There's a lot of that, but it's they treat you well in Pordenone. It's a very nice town, and the coffee's great. So yeah,
Excellent.
Come to Pordenone and watch some crazy films. You can definitely do a weekend, but you'll never be the same again.
Excellent. That's a promise or a threat. I'm not entirely sure. Final question then, Pamela. Given my self-confessed stated ignorance, what other Italian silent movies would you recommend? And I'll pop a couple on the Letterboxd watch list. Well,
I do think, I'm not going to diss Cabiria. Go and see it. Go and watch that on the biggest screen you possibly can and enjoy the vast size of that. I need to think about this. There's a director called Augusto Giannina who made some films which I think might be a really interesting follow-on to Assunta Spina. He had these sort of gamin heroines, so there's an awful lot of... So it's a slightly different type of female lead, something that feels more modern in 1920s. They were made in the 1920s often. But yeah, he sort of modernized it a little bit, and I'd recommend looking at a few of his films or his gone out of fashion for his politics. So forgive me for sending you to a bad person. But yeah, there's a film called The Fawn as well, which is a sort of magic realist film. And my God, I feel like I should know so many, and I always feel self-conscious about it. But yeah, those are some good places to start, and maybe I'll send you a couple more recommendations.
Well, I asked you for a couple. You could just say, look, I could tell you millions. Obviously, I've got a whole list here, but here's two to be going along with. Come back when you finish them.
If anyone from Pordenone hears this, I'll just be torn them from them, but that's fine. I'll go down watching silent film.
Don't worry, nobody is going to hear this. This is my podcast. Nobody hears this.
I could have been twice as scouse if I'd have known that. I didn't know.
But if you did, then I would, and then where would we be? As soon as I step into a taxi in Liverpool, it's like, you take me to the everyman lap.
If your pronunciation of the Italian might have suffered, and we were really relying on that one in this case. So.
Absolutely. Listen, Pamela, thank you so much for your expertise and for your recommendation of Assunta Spina from 1915, starring Francesca Bertini, and I'm looking forward to watching some more. Thank you so much.
All right, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. Ciao. I know I'm Italian. I totally do.
Thanks so much to my guest Pamela Hutchinson, and music by 2 Minute Noodles, available from Bandcamp.
Lavoratori!
Arrivederci ragazzi, ci vediamo in un prossimo film.
Lo speriamo.